The chair scraped against the floor. Clint Eastwood stood up while the executive was still talking. $400,000 sat on the table in a contract nobody had signed. The room went silent. "Where are you going?" the executive asked. "We're done here," Clint said. He walked toward the door. Behind him, the executive's voice rose with threats about blacklists and career suicide. Clint kept walking. That decision, walking out mid-sentence, would birth an empire worth hundreds of millions. But first, it would make him look completely insane. February 1968, Burbank, California. Warner Brothers Studios occupied 40 acres of backlots and sound stages where dreams were manufactured under strict supervision. The studio had survived the Great Depression, 2 world wars, and the collapse of the old mogul system. It knew how to handle talent. Clint Eastwood walked into the executive building that morning as a problem they intended to solve. 3 years earlier, he'd been a television actor grinding through episodes of Rawhide for scale pay. Nobody knew his name. Then Sergio Leone called from Italy with an offer for a Western nobody in Hollywood wanted to make. A fistful of dollars shot in Spain for $200,000. It made $14 million in Europe. 2 more films followed, for a few dollars more, The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. Suddenly, Clint Eastwood was an international star. Europe loved him. American studios noticed. But Leone had taught Clint something dangerous. On those Italian sets, the director controlled everything. Every camera angle, every casting choice, every cut in the editing room. No studio executives hovering, no committees making decisions, just one vision, executed completely. Clint watched how Leone worked, the precision, the efficiency, shooting scenes in 2 or 3 takes instead of 20, trusting actors to understand their characters, making bold choices without asking permission. He wanted that for himself. Warner Brothers wanted him for a Western called Hang 'em High, his first American film since becoming a star. Big budget, wide release, a chance to prove the European success wasn't a fluke. They had a contract ready, good money, standard terms. Standard terms meant the studio controlled everything. Clint had very different ideas about how this relationship would work. The executives were about to find out. The conference room had a long mahogany table, leather chairs, windows overlooking the studio lot where crews were building sets for next quarter's releases. 3 executives sat on one side. Clint sat across from them with his agent and business manager flanking him. The head of production slid a thick document across the polished wood. $400,000, he said, plus back-end participation if the film performs well. That's significantly more than you made in Italy. Clint glanced at the contract, didn't touch it. "I want to direct," he said. The executive smiled. The kind of smile adults give children who've said something cute but impossible. "Clint, you're a talented actor, one of our biggest stars now. But directing requires years of technical training, understanding complex production elements that—" "I want creative approval of the director," Clint interrupted. "Casting approval, final cut consultation." The smile faded. "That's not how we work here. Warner Brothers has made successful films for 40 years because professionals handle creative decisions. Actors act. Let the professionals handle the rest." "I've watched professionals work in Europe," Clint said. His voice stayed quiet, calm. "I know what I want for my films." "Your films?" The executive leaned back, exchanged glances with the others. "These aren't your films, Clint. These are Warner Brothers films that you're starring in. There's a difference." "Then maybe we don't have a deal." The executive laughed, but there was an edge now. "Be reasonable. You're an actor. You don't know anything about managing budgets, dealing with distributors. That's not your job." "What is my job?" "Show up on time, know your lines, hit your marks. Trust that people who've been doing this longer than you've been alive know what they're doing." His patience was thinning. Actors who think they can direct usually make expensive disasters. We're protecting you from yourself." Clint's agent tried to step in. Perhaps creative consultation instead of approval. No, the word cut through the room. What happened next would end one career and launch an empire. The executive's face hardened. "I'm going to be very clear because I don't want confusion. Clint is a valuable asset to this studio. We want to make many films with him, but he needs to understand his role." He leaned forward, each word deliberate. Actors don't direct. Actors don't control productions. Actors follow orders from people who know better. That's how this industry works. That's how it's always worked. The other executives nodded. This was orthodoxy, gospel, the foundation of Hollywood's entire power structure. Clint sat quietly. His face gave nothing away. "You got lucky in Europe," the executive continued. "Leone let you do your thing because the budgets were tiny and nobody was watching. But this is Hollywood, the major leagues. We have standards, processes, hierarchies that exist for good reasons." He pushed the contract closer to Clint. "You want to be part of this system? You follow the rules." "And if I don't?" Clint asked. "Then you go make your little European films for no money and no audience, because no major studio in Hollywood will let an actor with zero directing experience run their productions." The executive's voice carried absolute certainty. "It's not personal, Clint. It's business. Smart business." The room fell silent. Clint looked at the contract. $400,000. Guaranteed wide release. A path back to American stardom. Everything a television actor from Rawhide should want. Everything he was supposed to accept gratefully. He stood up. "Where are you going?" The executive looked genuinely surprised. "We're in the middle of negotiations." "No," Clint said. "We're done." "Sit down." The executive's voice went hard, sharp. "Don't be stupid about this. You walk out, you're walking away from $400,000 and a guaranteed hit. You think other studios will treat you differently? This is how Hollywood works." Clint turned to his agent and business manager. "Let's go." The executive stood now too. His face flushed. "You walk out this door, Eastwood, don't come back. Warner Brothers won't forget this. I'll make sure every studio in town knows you're difficult, that you have delusions about being a director." He jabbed a finger across the table. "You'll be lucky to get character roles by next year." Clint stopped at the door. He looked back at the executive. "Thank you," he said. "Thank me?" "For making this decision easy." Then he walked out. The story spread through Hollywood within hours. Lunch at Chazen's, drinks at Musso and Frank, phone calls between agents and managers. Everyone had an opinion. Most thought Clint had committed career suicide. The math seemed obvious. Studios controlled everything in 1968. Distribution, marketing, theater bookings. An actor without studio backing was an actor without a career. Sure, the European films had done well, but Europe wasn't America, and Italian westerns were a novelty, not a sustainable business model. The smart play was clear. Take the money, make the films, be grateful. Clint Eastwood had just torched $400,000 and insulted one of the most powerful executives at one of the biggest studios in Hollywood. Over what? Creative control? Directing dreams? Actors didn't direct. Everyone knew that. Even the few who'd tried, like John Cassavetes with his ultra-low-budget independent films, were operating in the margins, making art films for tiny audiences, not real Hollywood productions. The executive who'd negotiated with Clint received sympathy calls. "Difficult talent," other executives said knowingly. "You did the right thing. Can't let actors think they run the show." He agreed. He'd handled it correctly, protected the studio's interests, maintained the proper hierarchy. Within a week, he'd moved on to other projects. Clint Eastwood was yesterday's problem. Some other studio could deal with his delusions. Or more likely, Clint would come crawling back once he realized no one else would give him what he wanted either. The executive was certain of it. He had 40 years of industry experience. He understood how Hollywood worked. 2 weeks later, Clint Eastwood incorporated a production company in California. The name filed on the paperwork, Malpaso Productions. Malpaso, Spanish for bad step. Everyone thought starting his own company was exactly that. They had no idea what was coming. Malpaso came from a creek in Carmel, California, a dangerous crossing with a warning sign posted. Clint liked the irony. Hollywood thought this was a bad step, a dangerous crossing that would end in failure. He was about to prove them spectacularly wrong. The business model was simple but revolutionary. Produce films independently, maintain creative control, then distribute through studios who wanted the finished product. Studios hated giving actors power, but they loved making money off successful films they didn't have to produce. Clint approached United Artists, not Warner Brothers. They made a distribution deal for Hang 'em High. Leonard Freeman came aboard as producer. Irving Leonard handled business affairs. Director Ted Post signed on, approved by Clint. The cast was assembled with Clint's input, locations scouted with his consultation. Everything Warner Brothers said was impossible became standard practice. The film shot in New Mexico. Budget, $1.6 million, modest by studio standards. But every dollar was controlled by Malpaso, not distributed through studio bureaucracy. Clint didn't direct Hang 'em High. He wasn't ready yet. But he watched everything, learned, absorbed, the same way he'd studied Sergio Leone in Spain. Ted Post worked efficiently. Clint noticed which shots worked, which didn't, why certain scenes needed coverage, how to manage a crew, when to trust actors, when to demand another take. He was building knowledge, preparing. The film wrapped on schedule, on budget. No disasters, no expensive mistakes, just professional filmmaking with an actor who understood his role but also understood everyone else's. Hang 'em High released in July 1968, 5 months after Clint walked out of Warner Brothers. Opening weekend numbers came in, strong. The film had momentum. Final domestic gross, $11 million, on a $1.6 million budget. Clint's back-end participation as producer star paid him significantly more than Warner Brothers' $400,000 offer would have. And he'd maintained creative control over every major decision. The model worked, so he did it again. And the executive who'd predicted his failure started to realize something had gone very wrong. Success breeds opportunity. Studios that wouldn't give Clint creative control suddenly wanted Malpaso Productions on their release schedules. Universal Pictures approached him about Coogan's Bluff, a modern-day cop story, New York setting. Director attached, Don Siegel. Siegel had been making tough, efficient action films for years. Invasion of the Body Snatchers, The Killers. He shot fast, stayed on budget, didn't waste time or film. He and Clint recognized something in each other. On the Coogan's Bluff set, Clint wasn't just acting, he was studying, watching how Siegel set up shots, blocked scenes, communicated with cinematographers, made quick decisions that kept production moving. Siegel noticed, started explaining choices, showing Clint the why behind the what. A mentorship formed. Two Mules for Sister Sarah in 1970, Siegel directing, Malpaso producing, Clint learning. The Beguiled in 1971, same partnership, Clint absorbing everything about craft and control. Then Universal offered Clint a chance to direct, low budget, psychological thriller, Play Misty for Me.
Budget, $950,000. Small enough that if Clint failed, the studio wouldn't lose much. Big enough to prove he could handle a real production. Clint stepped behind the camera for the first time as director. Everything he'd learned from Leone crystallized. The efficiency, the visual storytelling, the trust in actors. Everything Siegel taught him activated. Shot composition, pacing, when to cut, when to hold. The film shot in Carmel, Clint's home territory. He knew every location, controlled every detail. Play Misty for Me released October 1971. Critics praised the directing, taut, suspenseful, assured debut. They noted Clint's efficient shooting style, his psychological intensity, his command of the medium. Box office? $10.6 million domestic on a $950,000 budget. Profit margin? Over 1,000%. Clint Eastwood could direct well, could make profitable films that audiences wanted to see. Everything Warner Brothers said was impossible had just been proven wrong. Again. But Clint wasn't done proving points. Also in 1971, another film released, one that would become iconic, Dirty Harry. Dirty Harry had been offered to Frank Sinatra first, then John Wayne. Both passed. Warner Brothers, the same studio that told Clint actors don't direct, came back. They wanted him for the lead role. But now the negotiation looked different. Clint wasn't an actor hoping for creative input. He was a proven producer-director with hit films and profit margins studios envied. He had leverage. Warner Brothers agreed to his terms. Don Siegel directed, Malpaso produced. Clint had creative consultation on everything. The film released December 1971. "Do you feel lucky, punk?" became one of cinema's most quoted lines. Box office? $36 million domestic. Massive hit.
Clint took home significantly more than any salary Warner Brothers had offered 3 years earlier. The executive who'd predicted his failure watched this happen from inside the same studio. Through the 1970s, Malpaso became a production machine. High Plains Drifter in 1973, Clint directing his first Western, a dark, supernatural revenge story that deconstructed everything the genre stood for. Budget, $5.5 million. Gross, $15.7 million. The Outlaw Hosey Wales in 1976, Clint directing and starring, a Civil War epic about a man who refuses to surrender. Budget, $3.7 million. Gross, $31.8 million. One of the decade's most beloved Westerns. The Gauntlet in 1977, Clint pushing action sequences to new extremes. A final shootout with a bus riddled by thousands of bullets. Practical effects, real stunts. Audiences loved it. Every Which Way But Loose in 1978, a comedy about a trucker and an orangutan. Critics hated it. Audiences packed theaters. Domestic gross, $104 million. The biggest commercial hit of Clint's career to that point. Every single film proved the same thing. Actors could direct, could run productions, could control their careers if they had the talent and discipline. Clint had both. Meanwhile, the executive's career at Warner Brothers was declining. The films he championed flopped. The actors he signed left for better deals. And every time someone mentioned Clint Eastwood's success, which was constantly, he had to live with the knowledge that he'd driven away one of Hollywood's most profitable talents. In 1979, Warner Brothers quietly let him go. Official reason? Restructuring. Real reason? His judgment had been exposed as catastrophically wrong. Clint Eastwood's success was a constant public reminder of that failure. By 1980, Clint was at the peak of his power. But he wasn't satisfied yet. In 1983, a screenplay landed on Clint's desk, The Unforgiven, by David Webb Peoples, a dark, revisionist Western about an aging killer forced back into violence. Clint read it, loved it, then put it in a drawer. He wasn't old enough yet. The character was a man haunted by his past, broken by violence, confronting mortality. Clint was 53, still vital, still playing action heroes. The role required age, weariness, the weight of years. So he waited.
9 years. While he waited, he directed Pale Rider, Heartbreak Ridge, Bird, a jazz biography that showed his range, White Hunter, Black Heart, each film different, each expanding his skills. In 1992, at age 62, Clint pulled the script from the drawer. Now he was ready. He approached Warner Brothers, the studio that had told him actors don't direct, the studio whose executive had predicted his failure. But different executives sat in those offices now. executives who understood that Clint Eastwood wasn't an actor who needed management. He was a filmmaker who delivered profitable, acclaimed films. Warner Brothers fully backed Unforgiven. Significant budget, full creative freedom, complete trust. The film shot in Alberta, Canada. Clint directed with the efficiency he'd learned from Leone and Siegel. Minimal takes, clear vision, respect for his actors. Gene Hackman played the brutal sheriff, Morgan Freeman the loyal friend, Richard Harris the English bounty hunter, all character actors at the top of their craft. Unforgiven released August 1992. Critics recognized it immediately as a masterpiece, a Western that deconstructed violence, questioned heroism, examined the cost of killing. Box office? $159 million worldwide. Then awards season began. Academy Awards 1993, 9 nominations, 4 wins. Best Picture, Best Director, Best Supporting Actor for Gene Hackman, Best Film Editing. Clint stood on that Oscar stage holding the Best Director statue. 24 years after walking out of Warner Brothers, 24 years after being told actors don't direct. He thanked his production team, his cast, his crew. He never mentioned any studio executives who believed in him early, never thanked the system for supporting his vision, because he'd done it himself, built it himself, proven it himself. But the story doesn't end with vindication. It ends with something more interesting than revenge. Malpaso Productions still operates today, 56 years after Clint incorporated it in California. Over 40 films produced, multiple Oscars, complete creative freedom for more than half a century. After Unforgiven, Clint kept working. Mystic River in 2003, $1 Million Baby in 2004, another Best Picture and Best Director win. Letters from Iwo Jima in 2006, Gran Torino in 2008, American Sniper in 2014. Each film made with Warner Brothers, not despite them, with them. The partnership that supposedly died in 1968 actually became one of Hollywood's longest and most successful collaborations. Warner Brothers distributed and supported most of Clint's greatest films. The revenge story everyone loves, the actor who destroyed the studio that rejected him, never actually happened that way. Because Clint wasn't interested in revenge, he was interested in control, in craft, in making films his way. The executive who told him actors don't direct, his name doesn't appear in Warner Brothers records from 1968. The confrontation might have happened, or it might be a story that's been polished and retold so many times that the myth replaced the memory. What's documented is this. Clint Eastwood walked away from traditional studio control, built his own production company, learned from masters like Sergio Leone and Don Siegel, worked with studios when it benefited his vision, directed over 40 films across 5 decades, won multiple Academy Awards, maintained creative freedom throughout. The real lesson isn't about revenge, it's about mentorship, patience, collaboration. Leone taught him visual storytelling. Siegel taught him efficient production. Universal gave him his first directing opportunity. Warner Brothers eventually became his longest partner. Success came from talent, yes, but also from learning, from building relationships, from understanding that independence doesn't mean isolation. The conference room where the meeting supposedly happened still exists at Warner Brothers. Some say older executives tell young producers the story when they get too controlling with talent. The executive who said actors can't direct, the actor who walked out and proved him wrong. But maybe the better story is the one that's less dramatic, less satisfying as revenge fantasy, more useful as actual wisdom. An actor who wanted creative control, who built a company to get it, who learned from masters, who worked with studios on his terms, who stayed disciplined and patient for 50 years. In 2021, at age 91, Clint directed Cry Macho, still working, still in control,
still with Warner Brothers. The greatest revenge isn't destroying someone's career. It's building something so enduring, so successful, so creatively fulfilling that the question of revenge becomes irrelevant. Malpaso Productions exists because one actor refused to be told what he couldn't do. But it survived because he learned what he needed to know.